First Chronicles chapter 10, let's call this one Mighty and subtitle it Mercy. Why? Because this is a chapter that shows us in spite of Saul's failures, some of his kindness early on in his reign is going to be returned to him in death as the men of Jabesh Gilead do not forget to show gratitude to Saul, as we said, even in death. But it begins with Saul going into battle and falling in battle. And the chapter is not going to mix words and saying that it had everything to do with Saul's failure as a king, understanding that just as Samuel had given Israel peace from their enemies, the Philistines, helping to subdue them all his days, Saul dropped the ball on that because he neglected to make it a priority. And so since he neglected to make it a priority, God chose not to save him from the Philistines. And so instead of subduing the Philistines, this chapter shows us how Saul fell to them in battle because of his own failures as a king. However, the Philistines, not content to simply kill Saul, when they find his body, they are going to make a display of it, taking his head, displaying it at their temple, and likewise hanging up his body and the body of his sons for the Philistines to see as they celebrate victory over Israel. But as we mentioned, the men of Jabesh Gilead in particular, they're valiant men, even though they could have said, look, Saul died because he screwed up. They did not emphasize his mistakes because part of his success came in saving them from their enemies, the Ammonites. And so once they hear of it, they go all night to recover his body at risk of their own lives, reminding us of this. It's one thing to be mighty or valiant, as these men of Jabesh Gilead are noted for being, but we've been talking about that whole concept of completeness. And in this chapter, the men of Jabesh Gilead are showing us the way in which might or valor is rounded out by mercy, reminding us of what Jesus himself said in the Sermon on the Mount. In particular, the beatitude that says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy," which seems to describe David's response to hearing about the kindness that the men of Jabesh Gilead showed to Saul. When in 2 Samuel chapter 2, beginning at verse 4, it's going to say, when they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul, your Lord, and buried him. Now, may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing," understanding that David is now in line to be king of Israel. The men of Jabesh Gilead did not have to do this for Saul because, as we've said, this chapter makes it plain that Saul died because of his mistakes. But it also reminds me of what the word says when it says, when we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so one of the things that distinguishes the men of Jabesh Gilead is beyond simply being mighty men or men of valor. They were men who remembered to show gratitude for the mercy that Saul showed to them, even though they clearly could have focused on all that Saul had done wrong. And so the men of Jabesh Gilead may give us another example of why God encourages us to be complete, because while being mighty on its own can just get old if all we're doing is flexing our strength, to the degree we can use our might to help show mercy, we are quite possibly moving one step closer to having the kind of strength that everybody can appreciate. And so my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that God grant us the wisdom to effectively round out our strength with the ability to give mercy when it is needed, even if it's not deserved.